رمضان تجلى وابتسم طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنم رمضان تجلى وابتسم
الله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. Respected brothers and sisters, the topic of the discussion is going to be about Shukr, is about the concept of making thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a very detailed topic, as is many of the other topics in Islam, like sabr and having being content, and also other sort of like aspects of Islam which are mentioned in the Quran and Hadith, which are to do with the internal aspect of being a Muslim rather than the physical practices that we do. So it's fiqh, which is the science of jurisprudence, deals with the differences when it comes to the limbs. In other words, the difference of practice, how you pray your salat, how you do your hajj, how you do all the actions based upon your limbs. Yeah, and this is pretty easy. This is because all you have to do is tick off a box. So if I want to pray my dhuhr, for instance, all I have to do is just tick off the boxes. Have I done my takbir? Have I done my qira'ah? Have I done all the other things? But when it comes to the internal aspects of Islam, when it comes to those things which are abstract concepts, shukr, sabr, it becomes very difficult for a lot of people to be able to understand this. And I think when it comes to the average Muslim person, when it comes to these terms, I think maybe practicing them, experiencing them is more relevant than just giving definitions. Yeah, so having examples of where shukr takes place, rather than saying, for instance, like for you to be someone who is grateful, you have to have done this, you have to have uttered it on your tongue, or you have to. So what is shukr itself? In the Arabic language, the word shukr actually has the meaning of something which is like large. They give example of a dar al-shakir. A dar al-shakir, dar means like the udder of an animal, and the shakir means when it's bloated. So it's like large, it's filled with milk. So the giving the example of this is like showing that when a person is thankful, when a person is shakir, that person is in a condition where they feel as though they're filled with like some sort of a favor or a bounty. And you've experienced it yourself most likely when someone has done something for you, they've gone out of their way for maybe bringing you a gift or giving you a lift in the car, or whatever it may be. Then all of these things, they make a person feel as though they have to kind of like show their gratitude, right? They want to sort of like manifest the gratitude, whether it's verbally or whether it's through their actions. So it's like a similar sort of like resemblance there with the other issue. So this is why when a person is thankful, thankfulness can be seen in the person, just like the udder. You can actually see the udder and you can tell if the udder is swollen, if it's got lots of milk in there, or if it's not. So this is why when it comes to practicing Islam, one of the things that we have to understand is how do we bring the shukr into our lives. So I want to give you an example from, first of all, I want to start off with an example from a hadith. And this hadith is a hadith which you might have heard of. It's mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim. The hadith goes like this. In the past nations, in Bani Israel, there were 3 men. And these 3 men were afflicted with some sort of a physical sort of defect. One of them had a skin defect, right? So he had a skin defect. The other one was someone who had a hair defect, as in it was bald. And the other one was someone who was blind. So you had a guy that's afflicted with a skin problem, another person that has a problem with losing hair, and another person with a problem with losing the eyesight. So the Prophet ﷺ said Allah wanted to test them. So Allah sent an angel, and this angel came to them, and he said that he came to the person with the skin disorder. He came to him first of all, and he said, what's the one thing that you really want in life? And this is the question. I mean, I want you guys to think about this as well, that in your life that you have, what is that thing in your life that you would really want? Think about that. So the guy obviously with a skin disorder, he says, if I could have one thing in life, that thing would be to have healthy skin. Right? I want to have healthy skin. So he says, fine. So the angel says, okay, Allah will give you healthy skin. So he gave him healthy skin. He says, what do you want? What kind of wealth do you want? So then he said, I want a camel. He goes, fine. He gave him a she camel, and then he left him, a pregnant she camel. So interesting thing about this is that first of all, the guy said that he wants skin, healthy skin, and then the wealth was given later. So this kind of like makes us think about sometimes what happens is when we have a deficiency in our life, when we have something that is missing in our life, sometimes what tends to happen is we focus so much on that problem, we ignore everything else in life. Like you can ask a person who has a medical disorder, if you ask him what they want, most likely they're going to be wishing that they could have this medical problem resolved. So this guy, he asked for this and he gets it. But remember, it's a test from Allah. When Allah gives you something, it's a test. When Allah takes away something from you, it's always a test as well. And the greatest test that we have generally is the test in wealth. Right? The Prophet ﷺ also mentions this time and time again about the test of wealth. Fitna to ummati al-mal. The fitna, one of the biggest tribulations of this ummah is going to be wealth. As in, there's going to be many people who will, utilize that wealth in such a way that it's going to become burdensome upon them on the Day of Judgment. May Allah save us. So the angel goes to the second man. The second man, he has, hair problem, bald head. And so the angel comes to him and says, what's the one thing that you want? He said, I want hair. He goes, fine. So Allah gives him hair. And the angel says to him, what's the wealth that you want? He said, I want cows. So Allah gives him, a pregnant she camel. And then he goes to the third man. And the third man is someone who has blindness. Right? So he can't see. So he says to him, the angel says, what is that one thing that you want in life? Now, we all know if we were blind, I mean, may Allah save our eyesight. But in reality, blindness is probably one of those things that you will never ever think about unless it happens to you. Right? How many things are there in the day that we can't do without blindness? So if you were to think about this problem, out of the three problems, which problem is the worst? You're probably going to say the blind, because the blind person, even like mundane things like going to the toilet, eating food, going outside for a walk, driving a car, none of these are possible when a person loses their eyesight. And so this is why the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith has said that a person who I have tested and I have taken away their eyesight and they show patience, he says, I will repay them with Jannah. Yeah, so Jannah will be given to that person. So anyway, the angel comes to this man and says to him, what do you want? He said, I want eyesight. And he says, what? Goats. So he says, fine. So Allah gives him. Then what happens, the Prophet ﷺ says, is that many years later, he says, the angel comes back to test in us. So here is where it kind of really, the thankfulness, the shukr that we were talking about, here's where the shukr comes into play. As in, shukr, thankfulness is not a sort of like one-off payment you make. It's not like, you just say thanks to a person or you thanks to Allah and that's it, end of job. Thankfulness is actually a state that you have to live in, a perpetual state that we have to put ourselves in, a thankful state. So if you look in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions about many of the Anbiya, he describes them as being shakir. Yeah. إِنَّهُ كَانَ عَبْدٌ شَكُورًا shakiran li'an'umihi. Ibrahim alayhi salam being described as being someone who is extremely thankful for the ni'mas that he's been given. And shakur is again someone whose thankfulness is at a very deep level. So it's like a state you have to go into, right? It's not just ticking off boxes. So this angel comes back now, and he comes in the form of a pauper, a beggar, and he goes to the first man. The guy had the skin disorder, and he's a beggar, and he says to the beggar, he says, "Please, sir, can you give me some a handout? Can you give me some money?" So the man has all these camels right in front of him, and he says to the beggar, "No, get lost, go." So the beggar says to him, he says, "Can I ask you a question? Where did you get? Didn't Allah give you all this wealth?" Like, he just said it just like that. Didn't God give you all this wealth? So the man actually says this, like he has the nerve to say to the man, he says, "No." He says, "I actually inherited this from my forefathers, and they got it from their forefathers, and they got it from their forefathers." So he was ready to lie, right, just to kind of avoid helping the poor. He was ready to lie and not thank Allah for what he had. The man said, "Are you sure?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm sure." So the guy goes, "Okay." The beggar he says that I pray to Allah that if you are lying, that may Allah return you back to your original state. Yeah, and then what happened was the guy went back to the original state. Allah took everything away from him. And then the second man, the angel comes as a beggar to the second man who has a hair problem, and he has all these cows in front of him, and he's got nice long hair. And so the angel says, the pauper, the beggar, says to him, can I have a handout? And he says no. He says, "What about all these cows?" He goes, "Didn't God give you this?" He said no, it's from my forefathers. As in, he is ready to deny God when it came to this. And then he says, same thing, he says, "If you're lying," he goes, "may Allah return you back to the state that you were in." And then what happens is everything goes back to the same. His hairs is returned back to the same, and he loses all of his cows. Then he goes to the third man, the blind, who had received his eyesight, and he comes and he says, can I have something?" So the beggar actually, when he asks him, this man in return says to him, he says, "Look at all these goats, take whatever you want." He goes, "Because Allah, He gave me all of this. Allah gave me all of this, and Allah can take it all away from me." And so the beggar, he then manifests himself and says, "I'm the angel that came to you the first time." And this is, this hadith, I think, is a beautiful example of, how we react to situations and show our true sort of color when it comes to thankfulness, gratitude, right? That for many of us, gratefulness is like, one of those kind of like kids, when the parent kind of like just says to them, "Say please, say thank you." I think for many of us, gratitude has simply become, lip service, right? It's just something that we roll off our tongues. It's something that we're kind of like accustomed to. It's not really true thankfulness from the heart, right? Illa masha'Allah. I know there's going to be many people out there who have experiences in life, but for majority, I think for us is the idea of this shukr that we have to inculcate inside of ourselves. So this story kind of teaches us many lessons, and one of the lessons that we get from this is the importance of remembering your state that you used to be in. This is one of the kind of things that helps a person to have perpetual shukr. Is like you're always reminding yourselves, you're always remembering. So if you look in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions about the gifts, the bounties that He gave the Sahaba, and He says to them that وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَى شَفَا حُفْرَةٍ مِّنَ النَّارِ. Yeah, that Allah brought you all together. Don't you realize Allah has brought the Muhajirin and the Ansar all together, right? And if you had spent all the money in the world to bring these two groups together, no one could bring them together. But Allah bring them all together, despite you people being on the brink of disbelief, yeah, on the fire of Jahannam. So it's like, always remember where you came from. So when a person is always perpetually remembering that, look, I used to be in this situation, the blind person seems to be someone that he can resonate with, because like we said, blindness seems to have more of a deficiency than not having hair. If you don't have hair, you can simply cover it up. If you have a skin disorder, then you can wear clothes and you can get away with it. But if you're blind, right, everyone will know you're blind, and there are so many things in life that you can't do. So this blind person, he showed shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarded him for this. This is the first story I want to mention to you guys. Another story I want to mention to you guys is Dawood alayhi salam. So Dawood alayhi salam is another example of shukr. And like I said to you, I don't want to go through sort of like, bullet points of shukr and, conditions and how you kind of define it. I don't want to go into all of that because it's all to do with experience in life, right? Dawood alayhi salam is another example. So Dawood alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says to him that يا جبال أوبي مع الطير وألنا له الحديد أن اعمل سابغات وقدر في السرد واعملوا صالحا. So there was Dawood alayhi salam was given bounty after bounty. We know in the Quran he was given mantiq at-tayr, he could speak to the birds. The mountains used to shake, which used to actually vibrate when he would recite the Zabur. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَنَّا لَهُ الْحَدِيدِ, and we have also softened metal for him. So one of the bounties that Allah had given him was he had the ability to manipulate metal and make it into armor. أَنِعْمَلْ سَابِغَاتٍ, he says, Allah says, I've given this to you so that you اعمل سابغات, number one, is for you to make, like do, so these kind of like armor, right? So in the military when they have this kind of very fine metallic sort of like hoops, armor, right? So this armor, he goes, I've given you this ability, أن يعمل سابغات, to make these سابغات, long armor dresses. وَقَدِّرْ فِي السَّرْد, number two, he said, make sure that you measure the hoops. وَعْمَلُوا صَالِحًا, and make sure you do righteous good actions. So if you look at this is something which is to do with shukr. And we know this because in the Quran as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to Dawood alayhi salam, اعملوا آل داود شكرا. Yeah. اعملوا آل داود شكرا. Yeah. وقليل من عبادي الشكور. اعملوا آل داود شكرا. Oh Dawood, do shukr. اعمل shukr. So this is the second thing that we need to learn. Number one is we learn about our past. Keep in mind, always remember who you used to be. Yeah, that's the first thing. Second thing is that remember, true shukr is actually action. The true shukr is actually action. How is it action? So look at Dawood alayhi salam. Allah gave him the ability to be able to manipulate metal. And then Allah instructed him, make sure you use this gift in a wise way. Like use the ability to manipulate metal, not to oppress other people, but to use it in a wise way. And an example of this is in the story of Zulqarnain. So Zulqarnain in Surah Al-Kahf, many of you might be familiar with this story. Zulqarnain was a king at that time, and he had immense power. Allah had given him immense army, immense sort of like technology at that time. So the guy was on the cutting edge of society at that time. He was like, leading in all sorts of fronts. So he comes to this people, and these people have a problem. The problem is that there's a neighboring city or village who pillage and plunder this village, right? So they said to Zulqarnain, can you build for us a wall? So the interesting thing again here is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions the construction. Like in the Quran, the only construction that I could find in the Quran which Allah mentions is the building of the Kaaba, right? Besides building of the Kaaba, the detail that's mentioned about how Zulqarnain built this wall is just phenomenal. Yeah, so he says, Atuni zubar al-hadid, bring large blocks of iron, hatta idha sawa bayna sadafaini, until you pile them up on top of one another and you level it off at the two peaks, and then get fire and then burn the metal. Yeah, unfukhu, burn it, and then pour over it qitra, pour over it another form of metal, so that the two metals combine together to form a stronger, like what we call steel. So in other words, this construction was mentioned, and you could see that the knowledge that Zulqarnain had been given was being utilized in the way Allah wanted. Yeah. So in other words, what does it mean to do shukr? To do shukr is to use your capabilities in the way that's pleasing to Allah. If you're a doctor, you use your capability to do shukr to Allah by utilizing it in the way you're supposed to do it. If you're a mechanic, you do the same. If you're an accountant, you do the same. And if you're a parent, you do the same. And if you're a child or whatever, an alim or a student, you do the same. So every person, how do they do shukr? How does Ala Dawood do shukr? The way that they do the shukr is by them fulfilling what they're supposed to be doing with the gifts that they've been given. Yeah. So Ani'mal sabiqat. Now interestingly, if you look at this, he says, Alanna lahul hadid, we soften metal for him. Ani'mal sabiqat, so that you can make this armor. As in, what do you use armor for? For battles. So Dawood alayhi salam was very well known for battles because he fought Jalut, yeah, Goliath. So he fought Jalut. Qatala Dawood Jalut. And so that was very, very important for Dawood alayhi salam to be able to be ahead, advanced in warfare. Yeah, so Allah is showing, although this isn't to do with shukr, but it's also showing that Muslims have to be advanced in technology. Like technological advancements for Muslims is a must. And so Dawood alayhi salam is being told, qaddir fi sard. He goes, but when you make the armor, make sure you qaddir. So in Ruh al-Ma'ani, Al-Imam al-Alusi, he mentions this. He says that qaddir fi sard can have two meanings. One meaning is the apparent meaning that we get. Sard means like the sequencing, right, of the hoops. So when you're making armor, classical armor, it was made from small hoops that are cut, and then you take the hoops and then you bend them, and then you link them together in chains, and then you make this magnificent sort of like dress. So qaddir fi sard, in other words, when you're cutting the hoops, make sure you cut them correctly, right? And I'm going to come back to this. And the second is qaddir fi sard, is make sure you measure the time you take out to do this work in your day. So how does this link into shukr? So this links into shukr because shukr is all, this is the third point that brings me on to. Shukr is to do with organizing. You must be organized in if you want the fruits of shukr. Yeah, you have to be organized. You can't be someone who is shakir and be someone who is very lazy, right? You cannot have laziness and shukr, right? I mean, although the opposite of laziness is not to be punctual, might be, but being punctual, being scheduled, having things, routines, having all your day sort of like productive, being productive, productivity and shukr are very, very important. So again, I think this is one of those things that many of us as Muslims, we fail in. And the reason we fail in this is because we tend to take the term shukr to be like this magical sort of magical concept that as long as we're doing shukr, everything else will become fixed. But it doesn't work like that. What you have to remember is shukr is like one of those Lego pieces. Yeah, so imagine you have a Lego piece and you have to build a construction. You have to build, let's say, a car. You have to build a ship, right? So shukr is putting all those pieces together. You're making shukr. I'malu shukran, like we were saying in the second point. Do shukr, ala Dawuda, right? So doing the shukr. So the first point, when he says make the suit, right? Make sure you cut the hoops. This is very important for students of knowledge, for scholars, and for anyone else who really wants to become very productive in their day, is that you want to, any sort of like venture you're going into, you have to be careful of all the details beforehand, right? Cutting out all the pieces for the hoops. You don't want to just like put one hoop and then cut one out and then put another hoop and then cut one out, because by cutting it out beforehand, you haven't, in your mind, you mapped it all out. You have a blueprint of how many pieces you have. Will it be feasible for you to make? So you can imagine this is like kind of like very sort of a nitty gritty sort of like ways of planning and performing some sort of like a long-term project, that you have to get every single thing precise to the T if you want it all to come together. One of those kind of like, those IKEA sort of cupboards or things, that all the pieces have to be pre-cut precisely. And if anyone isn't, it's not going to fit together. And the second tafsir of this is qaddir fi sard, is in your day, make sure you only utilize a certain amount of your day in doing this, right? So utilizing a certain amount of your day, what would that mean then? So what this would mean is that sometimes what tends to happen is, imagine all of a sudden, imagine like this, imagine overnight, like, your brain worked at full capacity, like these kind of films where they take some tablets or something and then they have this ability to be able to think at levels that no human can think, right? Now you think to yourself, imagine you have this mental capacity, ability, your IQ level was at, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000, and you could think all these kind of calculations and you could think of things, many steps before. What would you do with your life? Think about it. What would you do? Yeah, like what would you do for the first year? What would you do for the next year? What would you do for the next year? Have you ever thought about that? So if you haven't, that means, right, that you're not really kind of thinking at that level. You're not organized. And a good example one of the brothers gave, he said, we were in this sort of like meeting, right? It was a training meeting. And the brother, he said, okay, he says, imagine I give you £1 billion now. I give you £1 billion. So think about it. I'm gonna transfer £1 billion to your account right now. What are you gonna do with it? What are you gonna do to help the world? Right? So someone might say, oh, I'm gonna help poverty, I'm gonna feed all the orphans. Someone might say, I might build hospitals. Someone might say, I might finish off, world debt, or I might finish off pollution and all these kind of things, save the environment. But then when you come down to the nitty-gritty points and you say to them, okay, how exactly, tell me how much of what you're going to use where? Most people won't know because they haven't thought about it at that level, which is understandable, which is natural. But the things that we do have control over in our lives, those are things that we should be able to know exactly what we need to do in our lives. So this is why don't spend too much of your day doing something, right, when you have the ability. Organize it, spread it out over many days. This is part of shukr as well. And finally, the last point, just to finish off on today's topic, is that when it comes to shukr, right? Shukr, the opposite of shukr is kufr. Yeah? And kufr has two applications. One is the kufr we know as being a disbeliever. Someone who does not believe is called a kafir. But also the term is used for someone ungrateful as well. The kafir is called a kafir because it's like the kafir actually literally means a farmer who covers the land. So you put your seed in the ground and you cover it. The kafir is covering the true belief. And the kufran, the kafir of the ungrateful person, the ungrateful one is called a kafir because he's covering up what he's been given. Yeah, and this is important to remember. Sometimes it's actually part of what you've been given is to show other people. I'll finish off on one story what I mean by this. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he was once in his dars, and this is mentioned by Sheikh Abu Zahra in his book Abu Hanifa. He said Abu Hanifa was in his dars and there was two students there who looked very disheveled, right? They looked like they were very poor. So Abu Hanifa, the next day, he took some money and he put it in under their mat. So when they came the next day after class finished, he said to them, I've left something for you under the mat. So they pulled up the mat and they found money. So they took the money and said, no, we don't need this, we're rich. So he says, how come you guys don't wear like clothes that are befitting? So he goes, oh, because we want to, we don't want dunya, stuff like that. We don't want to kind of that come to us. Abu Hanifa said, no. He said that the Prophet ﷺ said that indeed Allah loves to see the effects of his bounties on a person. Inna Allah yuhib an yara athara ni'mati al-abdi. Yeah. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. As for the bounties that Allah has given you, tell people about them. So some things that Allah has given you, we shouldn't go around, broadcasting it to everyone because it might bring back negative sort of like responses. Yeah, jealousy, like what happened to Yusuf alayhi salam. But sometimes certain things that Allah has given you, you should publicly display it. Yeah, like maybe clothing or maybe the car that you drive or even the house that you live in. Because these are displays of doing shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said that whoever does not thank the people has not thanked Allah. Right? And this is like the scary kind of thing. Sometimes we might go into like a spiritual mode where we think, I'm only going to do thanks to Allah, no one else at all, because Allah gave me everything. But in reality, thanks has to be given to mankind as well. Your parents, your spouse, your children, your neighbors, even non-Muslims, things that people have given to us, we're very careful about this. And we make thanks to them. And by thanking them, we're ultimately thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to become people who are people of shukr. And one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also ash-shakur and shakir. And Allah being the shakur and shakir means that Allah acknowledges your gratefulness. He acknowledges it. So everything that we do, Allah acknowledges this. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also make us a means of bringing the ummah together and uniting them. Jazakumullah khair.
أرضى مولاه بما التزم طوبى للنفس بتقواها